What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Jones. Whether I'm hitting the trails, training for an ultramarathon, or pushing my limits in the gym strength training, I've always been fascinated by what drives us to perform at our best. This podcast is for everyone, from the serious endurance, strength, or hybrid athlete to the outdoor enthusiast who wants to live life to the fullest. I believe that peak performance is an assembly of physical training, mental fortitude, emotional health, and social support. Whether you're training for a sport or viewing life itself as the ultimate athletic event, join me in redefining limits and living a life full of challenges and adventure. Let's get into today's podcast. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. Today, we've got Katie Dabrowski on the podcast. Katie is a DPT, that's a doctor of physical therapy, strength and conditioning specialist, the co-owner of Old Bull Athletics, and a neuroscience professor at Nova Southeastern University. She also has a background in collegiate rowing, and before becoming a PT, she was actually a researcher in the field of neuroscience, which is super interesting. So, Katie, how are you doing?
I'm great. Happy New Year. How are you doing?
It's a great way to start the new year with you on the podcast because, we've been back and forth for a little bit and you've got an awesome background. So I think people are going to get a lot out of it. I'm doing great.
Thanks.
Life's been good over here. So thanks for asking.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, you wear a lot of hats. See, just that little list of things that you do there. It's quite long. So,
Yes.
yeah, I'm sure you're super busy.
Yeah, we all are busy, right? I mean, that's the nature of it. I think it's cool, though, being in a profession where I'm able to wear a few different hats and, diversify skill set, diversify, what types of things I'm involved in. It just keeps it really interesting.
Yeah, that's super fun. With that, love to get into kind of your background. So I definitely want to get into what you're doing now because I'm super interested in what you're pushing now. But before we do that, could you give a little bit of background on your background in sports, coming up in that, and then into the neuroscience period of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been involved in athletics, and the sport that really, really won me over was rowing, which is hilarious because it's so miserable. Like, why was that the thing that I chose? It's brutal, but in an amazing way. And I absolutely fell in love with it. So I was fortunate enough to be able to be recruited in college to row at the Division II level at Nova Southeastern. It's a small private university in the Fort Lauderdale area. That's where I teach neuroscience now. So it's kind of a cool full circle. And in high school, I was really lucky as well to have an amazing rowing coach who introduced us in ninth grade to strength and conditioning. Especially then, early 2000s, that wasn't really happening. And in the sport of rowing, strength training is not very well received, even though if you know anything about rowing, just watching it, you would understand that you need to be pretty strong to be able to do it. But there's a lot of old school coaches who don't really encourage it. They're kind of stuck in the mindset of, oh, heavier athlete, boat will sink, instead of thinking like, hey, look at all the power we can produce. So I was really lucky to get introduced to strength training very early on, since 14. I'm almost 32 now, so it's been a little while. And I think that definitely set the tone for the stuff that I knew I wanted to continue with throughout my life. Interestingly enough, though, I didn't realize I wanted to be a physical therapist until after I graduated college. It's funny because it makes perfect sense. Was an athlete, had the traditional injury, worked with a great PT, loved strength and conditioning, loved movement, but I was really focused on a potential career in neuroscience research and in academia. So I focused a lot of my sights on that. And then I was working in an awesome lab. It's called it's through the University of Miami, the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. It's a great spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury lab. And I was realizing that I was like sitting on a microscope, not talking to humans. And I thought maybe this isn't as sustainable as I once thought. Had the classic, life crisis moment, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm 21 years old. I'm so behind. I can't believe I'm starting over, which is funny now in retrospect. But pivoted and decided to take some of the prereqs for PT school that I didn't have from undergrad and decided to make that my journey. I kind of realized that physical therapy would give me a lot of things that I wanted. I get to work with people, not rats and microscopes. I get to combine my love for neuroscience with exercise science. And a really appealing part of it to me, and it's something that I try to encourage people when they're thinking about professions, it's a doctorate degree. So that means it opens doors for academia. So there's a lot of ways to leverage this degree that go beyond a traditional clinical practice. And that's what really stuck out to me. And here we are.
So you mentioned rowing in high school. Is that
Mhm.
common where you grew up? Because where I grew up, there was none. I grew up in the Midwest, so no water, but
Yeah.
all right.
Weirdly enough, it's actually, so I grew up in Florida and it's not super popular. At least it wasn't as popular then. It's a very like Northeastern sport. But I actually played lacrosse all throughout middle school. We had a really competitive team. And then I expected when I got to high school that I was just going to play lacrosse. But they started a rowing program the year that I got to high school. And I knew nothing about it. But I was just like, I get to be in a boat. That's pretty cool. So I went to the first meeting and just really liked what everything sounded like. I didn't even know that the seat slid and that you push with your legs. Like I just had no concept of what rowing was. And then I did the first practice and I was absolutely hooked. So it was very new in our area when we started. So I had to travel a lot for it. We had like boats donated to us from I don't even know what year. They were horrific. But by our second year, we actually qualified for nationals. So it was really cool. We had a great coach. We had a great team.
Oh, that's awesome. And you mentioned being kind of introduced to strength and conditioning at such a young age, which is also awesome. I feel like it's probably better now since there's more in the media, everybody kind of knows. So there's a little bit more access, but definitely it's important. I mean, you mentioned how long have you been strength training now?
I started at 14 and at the end of the month, I'll be 32. So it's been a
Yeah,
long time.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
And it comes back to what I try to talk about with all of my patients and clients too. Like it's just the long game. And, I talk about my experiences with starting at such a young age and how I think it really set me up for a lot of success to continue to be an athlete. Um, it's part of what I encourage all of the time, like just starting as soon as you can. And luckily we do have more information now, but I would argue to say that we were one of the very few high school programs that actually had legitimate strength and conditioning. So we're very fortunate.
Yeah, that's awesome. Nowadays,
Yeah.
especially in some of the bigger football states, some of those high school football teams are borderline collegiate strength and conditioning programs.
It's insane. Yeah. And there's great, I mean, even in Miami, so there's a lot of really excellent private schools with exceptional athletic programs and campuses that look like colleges and tuitions that cost similar to colleges. But they have like amazing strength and conditioning teams and coaches, this just like you would have in college. So it's pretty cool to see a lot of the changes.
Definitely. So, how long did you work in the research area before you decided, hey, I think I want to become a physical therapist?
Yeah, so all throughout undergrad, I worked in research labs at my university. That's the perk of going to a smaller school is I was able to develop amazing relationships with my professors and get involved in a lot of different projects, especially since my goal really was to get my PhD and you have to start immediately getting involved in projects, getting publications. So I was published a few times in undergrad as well, worked a lot on different projects with people at the university. And then I did my own version of a thesis for an undergraduate. And then I also worked every summer. I tried to find a university to work in a lab at. So I would work at the University of Florida one summer. I worked at Clemson one summer and just tried to pick and the University of Miami, just tried to get as much involvement as I could. So that was 2010 to 2013 when I was in undergrad. And then after that, I didn't go to PT school until 2016. So I was still involved in research after that. That's where I did more of my work. I did a fellowship through the NIH at the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis.
No, that's awesome. You mentioned earlier having a doctorate really opens up a lot of doors. Your PT school is a doctorate, like a clinical doctorate, right? As opposed to,
Correct.
say, like a research doctorate.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. You can. We did a lot of research. So I went to the
Mhm.
University of Miami for a PT school, and it's a pretty research heavy program. So we had some requirements for research. The perks of also just having more of the resume to back things up with all of my research experience and presenting that to the school that I went to undergrad with, who already knew me. Those connections really do help. So even though I don't have a research doctorate, it still was able to transition into a position at a university teaching level.
Yeah, the University of Miami has a really awesome program. I was looking at some of their masters for exercise physiology, and they've got a very, very robust program. It looks really good.
Yes, absolutely.
When you were kind of interested in moving away from the research and the neuroscience world to the PT world, I'm curious, did you consider anything else? Because to me, neuroscience, like sports psychology or something like that might be kind of a really easy shoe-in to work with
Mhm.
people versus, rats and microscopes. So what was that process like for you?
Yeah, I think when I initially got to college, I was kind of going back and forth with the clinical psychology side, and I was definitely interested in sports psychology. Then I took my first neuroscience course, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I'm obsessed with. So I think I had already kind of closed the door on the idea of sports psychology. I think it's an amazing field, and I could actually see myself in that field as well. But I think I was really drawn more to being able to combine my love for sports and athletics and kind of utilize a neuroscience lens to help people with orthopedic things, to help people with the psychology of injury. So it kind of, again, I don't really know why I didn't think of it sooner because I did all of the things that would make sense for me to want to be a physical therapist. But it just kind of clicked one day after I had the decision to not pursue my PhD.
Yeah, and you mentioned having an injury yourself and working with a good physical therapist and how that
Mhm.
maybe influenced your decision as well. So could you maybe speak to that? What was the injury? How was that process for you?
Pretty classic rowing injury, low back pain. Knowing more of what I know now and knowing a lot more about injury and back pain, I don't necessarily think it was like the disc herniation that they found on my imaging. I think it was so much more of, we were up at 4 every morning for practice. We had 2-a-days. I was a neuroscience student, stressed out. I would leave practice and go to a lab to work and then come back and take classes. I We're drinking on the weekends because it's the only free time we get. We're all of the stressors that kind of create that perfect storm that we talk with our clients and patients about for back pain. I would venture to say it was more of that. I was also a lightweight rower, which meant I had a specific weight I had to be at. And I know for sure I was not doing things really well with that. You're a 19-year-old girl who's going to get weighed every day, and you're thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to not eat today. So I guarantee there were way more of those psychosocial factors going into my pain that we didn't really understand then. I didn't understand then, but I had an excellent therapist who really showed me how much just talking about this stuff helped. And I think, again, I got kind of a unique experience that maybe was before its time dealing with this in 2012, before I think the biopsychosocial model was as popular as it is.
No, yeah, that's super awesome. So you got went through PT school, and then now you obviously are the co-owner of a facility, but I'm assuming you didn't start there, or did you jump right into that after PT school?
So I actually did not take a job as soon as I graduated PT school. It was terrifying. I was a trainer during PT school at just like a small boutique kind of fitness and one-on-one training facility. And the owner of that space was awesome. And he was very open to helping me start a cash practice as soon as I graduated. He renovated a space for me to have an office. We had a revenue share instead of charging me rent because broke grad student. And I basically had clients waiting for me to be a physical therapist because I was training clients. I kind of calculated that, okay, even if I only keep my current book of business as a trainer, I can pay rent. It's not going to be comfortable, but I can. So I took a big risk and said, you know what, let's just see if how this goes. And it went very well. I really liked starting my own thing. It was just me. I was able to work with a lot of the clients that I was training. And then I was also able to get, other business through marketing. And that was my plan. I was just going to be a solo practitioner in that little like one-stop shop training and then PT office. About 6 or 7 months in, things were growing really well. And I met Frankie, who's my current business partner, who started Old Bull in 2015 as a one-on-one training facility. The space is beautiful. The mission is incredible to change the experience with training. And we met kind of randomly and started talking, and he realized I did my own thing. He realized we vibed pretty well, and he said, "Hey, let's sit down and talk about this. If I don't want to refer people to another business if I don't have to. Would you want to see patients here?" And I was honest with him. I was like, "I appreciate it. I'm building my business just like you did. I'll give you like a Tuesday every week. And if you have patients for me, I'll see them. And then we'll kind of go from there and see if we work well together." After 4 or 5 months, we realized how well we worked together. And I brought my practice to Old Bull and we partnered. And that was in 2019, probably like 8 or 9 months after I had finished PT school and then worked through my own practice. So ever since then, we've joined forces. We have the physical therapy branch that's actually kind of become the main thing since we basically do training as well. And then now we have 2 locations with therapists between both.
So you mentioned doing a cash only setup when you first started. I know
Hmm.
that there's, reasons for that. And we've talked a little bit with Mitchell Tanner was on the podcast a few
Hmm.
episodes ago about some of the billing issues with insurance. When you first started, was the cash only because of that, or was it mainly logistical as, you were just finishing PT school, starting your business? What did that look like?
All of the above. I honestly knew, though, going through internships that I did not ever want to be a part of the insurance model. And let me have a disclaimer with that. That's not to say that physical therapists who are bad. It's not to say that those clinics are inherently bad. It's just that you're less likely to be able to provide completely one-on-one care that's a little bit more individualized and that actually takes somebody beyond what an insurance company would deem as functional. So most people we work with, they want to get beyond just like functional and passing with a C. They want to be able to get back to performance. They want to be able to get back to traveling, to hiking, to doing amazing athletic endeavors. And I just was really unsettled with like how I felt basically discharging everybody that I discharged when I was in all of my internships during PT school. Actually, my very first internship in a pretty traditional, like mill, very busy clinic setting, that's when I realized how messed up the system was because I had a few really active people that I worked with, like triathletes, and they would finish therapy, but they knew they weren't done. And they were like, well, can't I keep coming in? And we actually had to create a cash based training system at that facility so they could keep coming in because they're too healthy for insurance to cover them. So I just knew I was never going to be okay with that. So I didn't even want to try to start with insurance because I kind of knew if I start accepting this and then pull back, I'm probably not going to have an easy time like retaining business. If I just make it, this is what it is. I don't take insurance. This is why. From the get go, I felt that I could more confidently like withstand and keep that going.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before, but I've had that exact same experience when I was in high school. A lot of my friends did. We were in a small town, so you get 80% of the way there, and you can dress yourself. You can go to school,
Right.
work, but it was very frustrating, especially at the time, because I was listening to these professional and collegiate strength coaches and physical therapists on podcasts and YouTube, and so I knew what was there, but at the time it wasn't available to me, and it was very frustrating. So it's really good to see that come kind of full circle now that things have grown, reach has grown with social media. So could you maybe, for people that didn't listen to the podcast with Mitch, just give a quick overview of kind of the insurance model and the things you didn't like about? I know I've heard you talk about like the billing and diagnoses and kind of
Mhm.
that people feel broken because they get diagnosed with something. So could you maybe speak to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I think contribute to why the insurance model isn't as helpful for the patient and frankly for the provider either. First and foremost, reimbursement rates are getting lower and lower like every month. There's always an announcement from the APTA that Medicare is cutting costs and cutting reimbursement rates. The rest of the insurance companies follow what Medicare does. They're kind of set as like the gold standard. So if Medicare is going to reimburse X percent per visit, pretty much every other insurance company is going to do the same thing. So with constantly decreasing reimbursement rates, what that basically means is to keep the lights on, PTs have to see two, three, sometimes even four patients per hour to be able to make enough for the business so it can function and they can get paid. So that takes away entirely the ability to really individualize your approach. Again, it's not the therapist's fault. They want to do that. But if you're juggling three patients at one time, there's no way you can give somebody something, probably what they really need, or you can be as attentive with them. So that's a huge issue. And then on top of that is the insane documentation that is required to make an insurance company agree with what you're doing, even though you're the one with the medical license and you're the one with the doctorate degree. You're going to get somebody random who is going to say yes or no, most likely no, to covering your services. So the amount of work that goes into defending the decision making that a clinician has to do for therapy takes hours of documentation. There's very specific ways you have to state things. There's very specific billing codes you have to use. You're actually, a lot of billers encourage therapists to exaggerate symptoms so they're more likely to get reimbursement, which is also crazy. So there's a huge disconnect in the ability for clinical decision making to happen and how much you have to defend that to be able to get reimbursement. It's exhausting. So then half the time too, you're seeing patients, multiple patients, but you are typing away on your computer to try to get your documentation done so you're not working until 10 o'clock. So there's this huge issue of burnout that inevitably results in the therapist just being stuck and feeling really, really miserable with a super busy caseload, not great pay, and tons of documentation that often is unpaid. And I just don't think that's helpful for patient outcomes. And it's definitely not helpful for clinicians with quality of life.
Definitely. Yeah. When I was going through I had a concussion. And so when I was going through that with the doctor, not the physical therapist or anything, but the doctor, he would type the whole time. And I was always wondering, what is he typing? And then I got my medical record and I was like, oh, he typed everything I said, basically. I was
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, this is the most in-depth thing. And that was what went through my brain. This has to be exhausting to do this all day with people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then,
And with what you were mentioning with diagnosis stuff too, in order to get reimbursement, you have to have a diagnosis code. And it kind of results in us being really diagnosis driven with our testing and our assessments. So we'll learn in PT school testing and assessments that actually don't give us great information about somebody's function, but they enable us to slap a label on somebody. And that can be problematic for so many reasons. Most pain and injury in the absence, and I say this all of the time to all of my clients, in the absence of specific trauma, you got hit by a truck, you fell down. Most pain and injury is more likely to have something to do with being underprepared for whatever you just asked your body to do. So most things pop up with, I decided I'm going to be a runner and I ran 10 miles the first time. My knees are killing me. Did I tear my meniscus? Did I tear my ACL? Did I have a knee problem? No, I had an underdosing and an under preparation problem that caused my knees to be like, what the hell are we doing? That's not a diagnosis code. And that's not really something that's going to give somebody a specific tissue answer, but that's what people are craving. And when they get stuck with that label, they tend to feel pretty broken. Oh, I just have bad knees. I was told I have patellofemoral pain syndrome. I'm going to die. It's all of this stuff that really perpetuates that fear cycle, which, as you know, contributes to pain and increases our pain experience. So it's a mess in summary.
yeah, a long time ago, I had a kind of a hip thing, got some imaging, and it came back with this thing. And I Googled it, because I was like, what is this? And it was awful. And the physical therapist
Yes,
was great. She was like, this is just like what they say. She was like, I bet you 90% of like men your age come in and they put this on there. She was like,
yep,
no, it's not something to worry about. And that calmed me down, but it's definitely was an introduction to this topic of how that can, instantly I was like fight or flight. Oh no, like I'm never going to be able to run again.
for
Um,
sure.
and then,
And you're
um,
in the industry. So for that to be something that's scary for you, I tell that to my patients all the time. If I were to go and get an MRI of my back right now, I wouldn't want to see the report either because it would get in my head, even though I know that those findings have nothing to do with the fact that I do not have back pain and I do not have a problem with my function. But if I saw, I guarantee I have herniations because I'm over the age of 20. And I guarantee I have degenerative disc changes or any of those things that just happen as we get older. It would get in my head. And I know this stuff and I tell it to people all the time. It's a human nature. We're going to be freaked out by stuff that scares us like that. And it's going to contribute to how we move and how fearful we are after that.
yeah. And then you go in expecting to feel pain when you do something because you are, quad dominant or insert, and then you do feel pain because you expect that you're going to feel pain.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very frustrating. Ton of stuff to go in. But before we move on there, talking about kind of the insurance model, I have a few
Hmm.
good physical therapist friends that are kind of in the more, what people think of when they think of a physical therapist. And they're super awesome people, super great physical therapists, but they always talk about what you said. My one friend, he was telling me, I see so many patients every day, and then people are 5 or 10 minutes late because of traffic. And then I get 20 minutes with these people, which is
Yeah.
just not enough time. But I have this full schedule. And he was like, I can't give the care that I want to give because I don't have the amount of time. And then he added on to, he gets a lot of people that come in because they've been in an accident. They don't feel pain, but they come in for the insurance later if something happens. And then again, like people are late. I imagine with a cash-based business as well, you kind of get a different clientele than maybe traditionally. Again, people checking the box for insurance just in case, or, fill in the blank.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the things that I'm most grateful for, especially as we've grown to, we definitely see people who want to be there and we see people who are selecting to come and see us because they know what we do is different. They know that we don't spend times on the treatment table. We have squat racks. We have kettlebells up to 200 pounds. They know that we have stuff that's going to get them back to what they need to do. So they're actively seeking us out. We're pretty much 100% word of mouth and referral based. So we're getting people who are being told passionately by somebody that they trust that, hey, I had a great experience here. This is where you should go. Or we've had a lot of people who've had traditional experiences and they know it didn't get them where they needed to be. And they're trying to find something different. Or we have a lot of people whose health literacy is very high and they understand that the advice from their physician to never bend over again is probably not going to cut it. And they want to be told something different and they want to be shown how much they can do. We still get people that we have to, show them the way a little bit more. But definitely now, especially compared to in the very beginning when I first started, and I had almost a sales pitch ready because so many people, their first question was, do you take insurance or why don't you? We've really moved quite far away from that now because of our reputation and because of how the industry is shifting a lot. But we absolutely get to with the privilege of seeing people who are excited to be there, which makes it even better.
Yeah, that's super. I gotta be super nice for you, like just from a quality of life and feeling like very purpose driven in what you do, working with the people you want to work with. So that's super, super dope for you guys. When it comes to, you talked about like load management. You might not have said load management, but that's what came in my head.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that come to probably any trainer or any coach with, oh, I have this pain, like what recovery boot should I buy? What supplement should I do?
Mhm.
So how do you work somebody through kind of understanding, hey, this might be a life stressor issue, like a load management issue, seeing kind of the 10,000-foot view, bigger picture of things?
Yeah. And that, of course, has varying challenges based on the person and what their initial understanding is, how bought in they are to that. I'm constantly getting better at being able to have that conversation and also like reading the room. If it's somebody's first session and they're incredibly flared up, they're probably not going to want a lecture about the complexity of pain and load management. I might need to pepper some of that stuff in, but I'm really constantly trying to strategically navigate how I have those discussions with people. Because for a lot of people, it's like an earth shattering worldview. So many people still really do think that all pain equals harm, all pain equals tissue damage. If I have anterior knee pain, that must mean I have something structurally wrong. That must mean I need imaging. That must mean I'm damaged. And a lot of very, very intelligent people still believe that. So it's something that we have to approach really, really carefully to make sure not to discount people's pain and then also not to just throw information at them that they're not really ready for yet. A lot of times I'm very conversational in our first evaluation. And I typically start it with saying, have you ever had physical therapy before and what was your experience? Because I want to know what information they were given and I want to know what type of intervention they had. Usually not great information, intervention a little bit more passive rather than active. And I straight up say, this is probably going to be a little bit different. Today, we're going to talk a lot because the biggest thing I need to do is get to know you and your story. I'm going to ask questions. I want you to ask questions. I just want to learn about you and I want to learn about your pain experience. Because what we know is pain is a lot more than just one event or that specific location of your pain. And we want to make sure we curate a program that is tailored to exactly what you need. That immediately shifts them to realizing like, hey, this person cares about me. And might be the first time I actually am able to tell my story fully. So I always try to make they're the decision maker. They're the one giving me the information. They're the one dictating kind of how that first session goes. That's a huge starting point for me. And again, I'm constantly getting better at it. And then as we evolve together, the biggest things I'm trying to do are give people positive experience with movement. So I'm going to try to find like a variation of the hardest thing or the most painful thing and get them to do a very low pain or low threat variation of it, literally day one. That also helps because that starts to get the idea of, okay, movement's not bad. This is safe. I feel okay. If I can do that successfully in that first evaluation, the rest of the time, they're going to start to buy in more and more to understanding load management, preparedness, tissue tolerance and capacity, program design, how much that stuff is actually going to impact their pain experience more than if this pain, then this tissue is damaged.
Right. You mentioned before having a lot of very intelligent people come through. And I just wanted to make note that, it seems like most coaches are actually quicker to find professionals and coaches than maybe the regular person. I like to tell people, you can't read the label from inside the box. So,
Yeah,
even though we might know it, our experience is totally different than us helping somebody outside because, we're in the emotional box of,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned building a program for people. And
Hmm.
I know you're very passionate about rehab and training are not very different. You mentioned it earlier So could you maybe speak to that? Because a lot of people used to PT might be used to just like some band work, some stretches, and do that twice a day for, a month and then come back.
Yeah. So our first evaluation, a lot of what we talk about is what somebody's current activity level is and what their current training program looks like. Of course, it's going to vary. Not everybody I see is as active where they have that stuff, okay, I know exactly what you mean. Here's my current training protocol. But I would say 90% of the people who we work with are of that type of athleticism, or they take their health and wellness to that level. And usually there's so many things that I can find just in a discussion of what their current activity is and what their training program looks like. If I take all of that information and compare it to their goal or compare it to the symptoms they're experiencing, I tend to be able to find a lot of gaps that we can fill in. So a lot of what we do together, in addition to working together, is I'm giving them guidance for how they should work through their program and make some changes or add some different movement patterns, or change and create this modification instead of this. I also work with a lot of people who already have really great trainers. So it's a lot of communication between myself and their trainer, basically saying, your trainer's awesome. I love what they're doing. Here are some suggestions. Because I never want to create this weird authority dynamic, because if they're working with a trainer for a long time, they know them way more than I do. And I want to be almost more of like a consultant to them and give them some things to explore within their training. So there's a lot of that going on. And then what we're actually doing together in person is going to be progressing those harder things. And, my goal with everybody is to find an entry point to the hardest thing or the most painful thing. And then to also keep giving them challenging things in all of the patterns that don't bother them. So much more of our rehab process at Old Bull is about identifying, okay, if you have low back pain and you're the least tolerant to spinal flexion and a hinge, what hinge variation can I give you day one that is pain-free or in our safe zone of, maybe 0 to 3 out of 10, and you feel confident with, and you're like, whoa, I can't believe I could do that. And then in addition to that, what are all of the movement patterns that don't bother you that we can keep getting you to like RPE 6 or 6 to 8? So you're creating a stimulus and you're creating an adaptation while we continue to progress you back to that deadlift. So it's that delicate balance of, can I help you with your program? Can I find the hardest thing right now that you can do that probably used to scare you? And then can I give you a bunch of stuff to keep challenging yourself?
So obviously working through painful movements is going to differ depending on the person's threshold for pain. But do you give people like this should feel like a X out of 10 on the pain scale? And if it goes above that, maybe we should pull back a little bit. How do you manage that with them?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it's going to differ for everybody. And I know you know this too. You're always going to have those people who are a little bit more scared and they think everything's a 9. Or you have people who are, which happens to us a lot, like hardcore athletes. And they're like, yeah, but I have a high pain tolerance, so whatever. And then I'll ask them how that felt. And they're like, yeah, it's like stabbing pain. What? So I tell people it's going to be a process to navigate how you respond to these things and to understand what your pain threshold is. Pain is subjective, but a few guidelines that I like to give, then these are sweeping generalizations. This is not the same for like a stress fracture or like a really acute tendinopathy or things like that, but very, very sweeping generalization. I always tell people I consider 0 to 3 or 4 like workable, tolerable discomfort. That 5, 6, 7-ish is a sign to tell me to pull back, modify, change the movement. Beyond that, we're stopping and we're picking something else entirely because it's just not productive pain. And I never frame it in a way that pain is dangerous. I frame it more as, this is just non-productive and you're going to get irritated for no good reason and we're not going to be able to do what we want to do. So I never frame it as alarm bells, this is dangerous. And then I also say, my second kind of disclaimer, I want to see how you respond to this. And if you're sore and a little bit uncomfortable within the next 24 hours, cool. If it goes beyond that and you're still pretty uncomfortable, we probably have to dial back our intensity. Again, consistently not saying it like, if that happens, oh my gosh, everything is terrible. And more, okay, we just have to pull back. I try to be very casual in those conversations because it makes other people less freaked out about their pain.
Yeah, definitely. And like you mentioned, a lot of these athletes probably are used to pain. And so especially, for me, I know better, but in the same scenario, I would probably tend to push a little farther because it's, like I'm used to this. It doesn't hurt that bad until it almost, flip a switch and okay, that hurt pretty bad.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have people coming in. So clearly they're open to change. They kind of know how you operate, probably word of mouth, right? But do you ever get some of these high performers who are kind of resistant to pulling back if they need to a little bit because they feel like they should be able to do what they're trying to do?
Oh yeah, for sure. I talk about this with a few other talks and seminars, and I've probably mentioned it on podcasts before. I'm kind of when I'm meeting somebody, I'm in my head trying to categorize them as somebody who's an overdoer or an underdoer. Underdoer is going to be somebody who fits more in that box of they're underprepared for their goals. They're not hitting physical activity guidelines. They're not strength training or doing the appropriate work for what their goal would be. The overdoer is like a lot of our clients, kind of like that urban athlete. They take hit boot camp classes every day. They cycle to work. They hike every weekend. When they travel, they're doing some like absurd adventure sport. They're training for a race. They're strength training. They're doing a million things. And that's, I would argue, the harder person to reel in. And it takes time. And again, I'm still trying to get better at this, trying to level with those people. So what I'll typically do, unless they were doing some activity that is so dangerous or not productive, I'm really not trying to tell them hard rules of what not to do. I'm instead giving them a compromise of, okay, you do Barry's boot camp 7 days a week. Can we do 4? And then can I give you some suggestions for your strength training, or can you focus on strength training with me and see how we respond to that? And I'm also honest with people. This is science.
You
Too
cut
many
out, I think. I can't hear
variables.
you.
Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear
There
me?
you go. Yep.
Okay. Let me try to go back to my AirPods. Let's get that like this. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me know if I cut out again. I also try to explain to people like this is just like a science experiment. There's too many variables. I have no idea if what I gave you helped you or hurt you. I have no idea if our modifications are good and you're responding well to them, or they're still maybe too intense or not intense enough. And that usually helps where I'm saying, like, if I don't know all the things that you're doing, or if you're doing like 17 things during the week, we have no idea if our intervention is working. We're going to get better at being able to see that if we're doing fewer things and focusing on a more consistent program. Most people just need consistency, and most people don't have consistency. So that helps some of the buy-in of trusting the process too.
So you mentioned overdoers and underdoers. This is an interesting conversation I've had with a few other coaches since the RPE model in a strength training program. If you have an overdoer, will you maybe sometimes give them a lower, for instance, RPE, expecting them to overshoot it, and vice versa for the underdoer, maybe give them a little bit higher, expecting them to undershoot the intensity a little bit?
Sometimes, yeah, that definitely depends. A lot of times when I'm doing the higher RPE work, I'd want to make sure I do it with them first so I can see what is going on. Because if it's just stuff that I'm giving them and they're like, yeah, I hit RPE 7 and they're like 1 rep maxing everything, I don't know necessarily. So I definitely try to just visually see what's going on. How's their facial expression? How's the speed of their movement? Are they like gassed in between every set? So that can definitely be a strategy. I think over the years too, I've just gotten a lot more comfortable with being a little bit more go with the flow and straight up saying to people, you work hard and you're used to working hard all the time. We might not hit these perfect RPEs, and we just have to work together to figure it out. I might present it in a few different ways. I might do reps in reserve and say, okay, if we say this is an RPE 7, could you really have done 3 or 4 more reps, or could you have done 1 more? And that can be helpful for some people too. For other things, we might look at other metrics like heart rate, like breathing rate, conversation, the talk test. If we're doing anything and they can't talk through it, if that's a goal for them, that's something we'll look at too. But yeah, a lot of the times I'm just kind of navigating it in real time and trying to figure out, okay, how do I pivot?
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's the great thing about in person, because you can see that versus maybe being remote and relying on maybe a bad angled video that somebody sends you or
Right.
something.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
when you're working somebody up, do you take into account, obviously you take into account when they tell you about maybe their life stress. You mentioned somebody who does a lot. Are you working with people depending on the relationship on maybe dialing back some places in the rest of their life? Because clearly, especially the overdoer maybe goes 100% at work and then 100% after work when they train, and then again travels and all the things. And by the end of the day, they have nothing left in general, not just to train, but in life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the hardest part. I have a lot of conversations of just trying to help people understand all stressors are perceived by the brain as the same cascade of hormonal and chemical events. It doesn't matter if it's a training stress that's generally positive. Doesn't matter if you're stuck in rush hour and you're screaming at somebody. It doesn't matter if you're late on a deadline. It doesn't matter if you just broke up with your significant other and you're moving out. Your brain is chemically and hormonally processing that the same way, and it's going to contribute to your overall body's ability to tolerate anything that comes its way. So I find that helps people a little bit, just realizing, oh, everything I'm doing is contributing to like how well I can manage things. And that can be helpful. I do give some just like general lifestyle and like guidance, but it's definitely not my scope or my specialty. So with that, I have amazing resources for like lifestyle coaches and different types of psychology, mental health counselors, family and therapy, a lot of like sports psychology. I have some like people who specialize in pain and injury, which is an amazing field of psychology. So I try to utilize those resources when I can.
Yeah, and I think it's super powerful just to give people a little bit of visibility into that. Life stress does play into things. I'm
For
sure
sure.
you've had two athletes upset at a performance in something because they performed better maybe 2 months ago, but their life is 10
Hmm.
times more stressful in this moment. So just explain to them like, no, that makes sense. Your day was stressful. Your week was stressful. You got, 5 hours of sleep 2 months ago. You weren't working that week or whatever. And
Hmm.
just helping them stop self-berating, realize that you only have so much capacity.
Yeah. And I try to be real with people and tell them about my own experiences too. So, the relationship goes both ways. The therapeutic alliance, I want my clients to know that I'm a real person with struggles as well. I'm an extremely type A person, an overdoer to the fullest extent. And that might be why I gravitate even more toward people who are that way. And I absolutely overstress myself and I feel the effects of it. And I'm really candid with people about that. And I'm candid with the strategies that I try to implement with myself. I work with a lot of other business owners and a lot of like very successful people, and we can kind of level on that. And I'm saying, yeah, like this sucks sometimes and this is really stressful. Here are some of the strategies that I try, or here are some things that I can't figure out. Do you have a strategy? Like just trying to talk a little bit more human to human, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I think when you are a business owner, it can be very scary at first to be open about the things you struggle with
Hmm.
because you think people aren't
Hmm.
going to trust me if they know I struggle with things. But clearly, even talking to you, you're very easy to relate to, very easygoing, and actually helps you to be a little more open about the things that you struggle with because it shows people that, you are relatable, you are human, and you know what you're talking about because you live the experience.
Yeah, well, thank you. And that's the goal. I think a lot of us want to, be able to show people that we're humans too, and that navigating pain and injury is vulnerable and scary. Arguably, one of the most vulnerable things that somebody could do is tell you about their pain experience, especially people who've had chronic pain or just who've been really underserved for a long time or been told that there's a million things wrong with them. And I think just being able to be vulnerable back is really important for trust.
So I wanted to be able to have more time to spend on this next question because I know it's something that you're passionate about. But as always happens in podcasts, it goes a little longer. But I know
Yeah.
right now in the last few months you've really been pushing your training in is healthcare talks and seminars, and I really love your take on this and your stance on this. So could you give people an introduction to what you mean when you say training equals healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this seminar has been, I think, probably one of my favorite things that I've been able to work on. And it basically all comes back to the premise of, training and getting strong and becoming resilient is the best form of healthcare that we can possibly help people with. I always tell people like having muscle mass is like the cheat code to life. And I could go into dive into the nerdiness of what a protective organ muscle is for hormonal responses and for everything that we do, for the stress response, for how we respond to cortisol, all of that. But it really comes down to empowering people, making people have their health span match their lifespan. We're living longer, but we're not living as high quality of life. Have people stay independent, have people love moving and being strong. That's a really unique and cool position for a trainer or a coach to be in. The Training is Healthcare seminar is for everybody, but it's really focused on kind of elevating trainers and coaches to realize that they absolutely are part of the healthcare team. And a few of my opening slides actually show the comparison of how many times per year a client or a patient sees their physician versus how many times per year they see their trainer or coach. 3 times a year versus calculate it yourself. If you're seeing somebody 2 times a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week for like the majority of the year. Trainers and coaches are at the forefront of healthcare, and they're the ones getting asked every question that's within their scope or not from their client. And my biggest goal is to help position trainers and coaches to realize that and to be really empowered with what kind of role they have in healthcare. So the course is all about helping trainers and coaches identify red flags and knowing what to do if they spot any, but also showing people how rare red flags are and kind of empowering trainers and coaches to realize there's so much more you can do with somebody who's in pain if they don't have these red flags that a lot of people don't even realize, or understanding, okay, like a past medical history of a meniscus tear 15 years ago, their knee just needs to be a better knee. I don't care if they had a meniscus tear. If they don't have red flags, if they can walk in here, okay, we have so much we can work on from just like making them a better human and making their knee a better knee. And what does that look like as a trainer and coach? And how do you manage that within your scope of practice?
Yeah, I think it's important that a lot of the certifications and things focus on scope of practice because you don't want somebody operating way outside what their scope is. But there's not a lot of training and information on how to operate within and kind of in those blurred lines. And so I think, I listened to your talk at the Compound Performance Summit, and I think it did an amazing job of kind of explaining how to navigate that, especially because you might have somebody who has something that's maybe outside your scope of practice, but because of the medical situation, maybe they don't have an appointment for 2 months. So what do they do in that meantime, So I thought it was super empowering with the information, and I thought it was laid out super well. And definitely coaches and trainers can get a lot from it. If somebody might be interested, maybe they're not a trainer or a coach, just kind of like an athlete and they're interested, what kind of things do you think that person could get out of it?
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for listening. First of all, that Compound Performance was awesome. The summit was awesome. They had a lot of great people. So I was happy to get to be a part of it. Yeah, I mean, athletes would definitely benefit from it too, because we dive a lot into also like the complexities of pain, and a lot of the things that a lot of excellent trainers and coaches are not aware of, and a lot of people who are out there performing are not aware of. I really think if more people just understood that pain did not equal harm all of the time, or the difference between a traumatic injury and something that's kind of crept up over time, or just that it's not dangerous to move in the absence of these like super severe and obvious red flags, especially with things like back pain. I mean, so many people, the instant they feel pain in their back, they think they're dying. And I explain it to a lot of people, like there's important stuff in our back. The brain does a really good job of increasing sensitivity to areas that are important. So it makes sense that your pain response is going to be heightened. However, we've ruled out all of the stuff that could be severe. We're good. We just have to get through that initial phase of your brain being on like super high alert. And I really just crave that people could understand that more. And that's become one of my biggest passions. So, educating fellow clinicians and fellow healthcare providers and fellow trainers and coaches is huge. But of course, if athletes could come and see that too, that would be amazing.
So do you have any upcoming maybe in-person events, or is there anywhere online people can find the talk if they're interested?
Yes. So I have some upcoming in-person things going on. I'll be speaking at UCF in Orlando, University of Central Florida, the weekend of February 2nd and 3rd. There's like a rehab exercise science conference, and I'm talking about a lot of this stuff, weaving theories of what pain is with, creating a training stimulus in rehab and kind of how we can make people better by doing that. In March 9th through 10th, doing a kettlebell course with my partner Frankie at our Coral Gables Old Bull location. So it's weaving kettlebell skills into rehab and training. And then March 16th and 17th, I'll be in the Raleigh, North Carolina area at a gym called Omnia Performance. And it'll be my traditional.
We call Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yeah. Okay. Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yeah, you're still not there.
How about now?
There we are.
So weird. How dare you, AirPods?
Technology.
I know. Raleigh, North Carolina, March 16th and 17th for my training as healthcare seminar at a gym called Omnia Performance. And I'm finalizing some dates for some other areas. It looks like Newport Beach in California in July, and I'm finalizing those dates, but I'll likely have 2 or 3 other things coming up a little bit later in the year. You can find all of that stuff on our Instagram, Old Bull Athletics, or on mine, Katie Dabrowski, and our little link trees. So anybody who's interested in that stuff, just straight up DM me, ask questions. I'm cool with it.
So, okay, cool. You can hear me. So obviously you're in Miami. If somebody is interested and they're not in Miami and maybe they're not in an area where they can attend the seminar, or maybe they are like, hey, your physical therapy is exactly what I need, but I'm in Wyoming or something. Do you have any resources for those people?
Yes. So in terms of education resources, that's actually one of my big 2024 goals is to get some more stuff online. 'Cause so far, I've really done the majority of it in person. So I'm working on kind of like a curriculum and some more resources for people to have access to. And technically, as physical therapists, we can't work with people in a state that we're not licensed with, but we can do strength and wellness. So if people are interested, we can do virtual evaluations through Old Bull. Additionally, luckily, because of the wonders of social media, I have a pretty great network of people all over. So I'm always happy to help people find a physical therapist in their area and kind of give them the green light. Yeah, this person looks like they know what they're doing. Because it might be somebody I already know, or just with a search, there's some things that I look for when I'm referring people to different providers.
Yeah, I also just want to plug your academics, gifted academics, right?
Yes.
I did the CSCS stuff that you guys, that was pretty solid. That was a good
Yes,
time.
I'm so glad. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if people are interested in obtaining their CSCS or their NASM CPT or their CISSN, just through the International Society of Sports Nutrition, I work with a great company where we develop self-led and instructor-led resources to get those certifications. Frankly, because most of the stuff out there is pretty garbage and the pass rates are like 50%. So we wanted to create something that worked a little bit better, that gives you connections with people who actually utilize the certification in real life in their practice and who's counting, but we have a 100% pass rate for all of our exams. So we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah, it was a good time, especially from a coaching standpoint, because I was able to have some conversations of, this textbook says one thing. Obviously, this textbook is a few years outdated and it's a textbook. So practically, I was able to learn a lot as a coach, not just study for the certification. So it was super useful for me. I got a lot out of it.
Awesome. Cool. I'm so glad you were successful in it and you enjoyed the process too. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was good. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to share about your practice, just about things in general people should know?
You asked excellent questions. I feel like we we covered the main things of, I urge people, it doesn't necessarily have to be cash based, but I urge people to look for a rehab provider who can give them the most one-on-one time possible. I understand not using insurance isn't possible for everybody, but I also urge people to look at kind of what the costs will be down the line. If I can see somebody only a couple times and give them a lot of strategies and create a plan with them versus that traditional 3 times a week for 12 weeks, your copay is $40, you're probably still going to end up spending a lot more if you go that route. And you're going to not have that one-on-one time. So I urge people to look a little bit more at the quality of what they're getting instead of saying, oh, well, this is what my insurance covers. Again, not always possible, but people, be an advocate for yourself. Your healthcare is so important and look at the options. There's a lot more that exists out there now, or even hybrid programs where you might work with somebody in person and then they transition to programming for you. And the cost and the barrier to entry is much lower. So there's a lot of different options that exist now, which is super exciting. Like healthcare is shifting dramatically, but advocate for yourself and do some research and ask people. Like I said, DM me if you have a question about, what type of care you should be receiving. I want to be able to help with that.
Yeah, that's a great resource. Speaking of your Instagram, we'll plug everything in the description, but could you give people where they can reach you? You've mentioned it before a little bit, but kind of a one summary of where people can reach you or Old Bull.
Yes. So Old Bull's Instagram is just Old Bull Athletics. Mine is KT, the letters, Dabrowski. Definitely look up the spelling for that. And those are the best places to reach us. Like I'm talking through Instagram all of the time. So it's a really easy place to just reach out to our business page or to myself, and we're happy to help.
Good deal. Well, Katie, thanks for coming on. I'm sure people got a lot out of this. I really enjoyed talking to you. I love all the stuff you post on Instagram. It's super valuable and also just hits my nerd brain, as a coach and a person. So, keep doing that. I'm at least into it. I'm sure you got plenty of other people who are too. So
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
yeah, thank you for coming on and have a great rest of your day. And I'm sure I'll talk to you again on Instagram.
Sounds good. You too.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you enjoyed it, it would be helpful if you could leave a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening on, as that helps us reach more audiences and get more awesome guests on. If you're interested in anything we talked about today, you can check the show notes for all links. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next podcast.